Welcome to a journey through one of the most disturbing cases ever recorded in the dark history of the Ozark Mountains. Before we begin, I invite you to leave a comment. Tell us where you're watching from and the exact time you heard this story. We're genuinely curious to know when and where these accounts reach you, whether it's deep in the night or early in the quiet morning hours. The records of what later became known as the Farmhouse at Stillwater Hollow remain untouched for over half a century. Hidden away in the remote southwestern stretch of the Ozark Mountains, the property itself no longer exists, at least not in any recognizable form. What survives are fragments of official documentation, scattered newspaper clippings, and collected testimonies that researchers have carefully pieced together over decades. The case first surfaced in the spring of 1908, but the chain of events that led to its discovery began years earlier. This is not a story of supernatural hauntings or unexplained phenomena. What makes this case so deeply unsettling is its horrifying normality, the quiet, human darkness that hides in plain sight. According to county records from Shannon County, Missouri, the property was purchased in 1902 by Thomas Blackwood, a man in his early 40s who had arrived from Pennsylvania with a modest fortune and a clear desire for privacy. The farmhouse itself was humble by the standards of the time, a two-story wooden home with a stone foundation, located roughly 17 miles from the nearest town of Eminence. The purchase was made with almost no interaction with the previous owner, Margaret Stillwell, a widow who was reportedly eager to leave the area following her husband's death. Locals described Blackwood as tall, well-spoken, and reserved, a man with a taste for formal dress that seemed oddly out of place in the rural Ozarks. He stood out, recalled Samuel Harkins in a 1964 interview, one of the few surviving residents who still remember the stranger's arrival. Folks around here didn't take kindly to city manners back then, but he paid in cash and kept to himself. That earned him a certain kind of respect. The property stretched across roughly 80 acres of mostly forested land, with a small cleared section for farming, a natural spring, and what locals referred to as a hollow, a shallow dip in the earth that formed a natural amphitheater, shielded from both view and wind. The farmhouse sat on a slight rise overlooking this hollow, accessible only by a narrow, winding dirt road that turned nearly impassable during heavy rains. Such isolation wasn't unusual for the Ozarks. The region had long drawn people seeking distance from America's rapidly industrializing cities. But what stood out about Blackwood was a complete lack of interest in becoming part of the community. While most settlers eventually relied on neighbors for survival, Blackwood lived in near total isolation. His rare visits to Eminence for supplies were brief, efficient, and entirely businesslike. The first 2 years passed without incident. Records from Greer's General Store in Eminence show regular purchases of flour, salt, coffee, ammunition, and occasionally tools or clothing. The quantities were modest, enough for one man, but unusually small for anyone running a farm. No livestock was ever brought to property, and travelers passing nearby reported no visible crops beyond a small kitchen garden. This reclusive existence drew curiosity, but little concern, in a place where minding one's own business was a long-standing rule. Storekeeper Arthur Granger noted in his ledger, Mr. Blackwood settles his accounts promptly and in full. Beyond this, his affairs remain his own. For nearly 3 years, the Blackwood property existed in this state of quiet seclusion. Tax payments were made promptly, but otherwise, there was no sign of activity. Then, in late 1905, something changed. The postmaster's log from Eminence recorded regular correspondence suddenly arriving for Thomas Blackwood. Even more intriguing, deliveries of building materials and furnishings began to increase. Receipts found later in county archives listed new bed frames, linens, kitchenware, and most notably medical supplies. At the time, no one knew why he needed them, though gossip inevitably followed. It wasn't until the spring of 1906 that the mystery truly deepened, with the arrival of the first guest, Martha Jenkins. Her name appeared in the Stagecoach Manifest on April 12, 1906. She was described as a woman around 30 years old, traveling alone from St. Louis. According to the station master's notes, Thomas Blackwood himself arrived to meet her in a newly purchased wagon, offering little conversation before leaving with her. She was never seen in town again, and her presence might have been forgotten entirely, if not for what came next. Over the next 18 months, 7 more women arrived under similar circumstances, each traveling alone, each disappearing into the isolation of Stillwater Hollow. The pattern became disturbingly consistent. Every 6 to 8 weeks, a new woman would arrive by stagecoach or, occasionally, private carriage. The station master, Obadiah Fletcher, kept meticulous records. His detailed notes, recovered years later during the investigation, provide the only surviving descriptions of the women who vanished. Catherine Miller, 25, blonde, educated, claimed to be from Chicago, May 30th, 1906. Louise Hoffman, dark-haired, slight German accent, visibly distressed, August 3rd, 1906. Sarah Blackstone, well-dressed, quiet demeanor, refused help with luggage, October 17th, 1906. Josephine Reynolds' final entry, December 8th, 1907. Station master's note: Mr. Blackwood appeared unusually agitated during collection, departed without the customary payment for services. Local physician Dr. James Morrison later mentioned these events in his personal journal, a document discovered decades after his death. The journal was later discovered in his grandson's attic. One entry reads of rumors, talk spreading to the nearby towns, about a sanitarium of sorts being operated at the old Stillwell place. While I have received no professional consultation on the matter, Dr. Morrison wrote, I understand from Mr. Granger at the general store that the supplies being ordered suggest medical attention is being provided. In these remote regions, unlicensed care was not uncommon, yet Morrison admitted to a growing unease, a concern for the welfare of those rumored to be living there. The entry was dated September 1907, suggesting that word of the farmhouse's supposed new purpose was beginning to spread, despite there being no official registration of any medical facility. What made the situation so peculiar for the time wasn't merely the existence of an unregistered sanitarium. Such places were fairly common in rural America, where licensed doctors were scarce and regulation was minimal. No, what set it apart was a complete absence of community integration that usually surrounded such enterprises. Legitimate practitioners serving remote areas often kept ties with nearby towns. They'd attend community gatherings, share knowledge, and build relationships with other healthcare providers. Blackwood's operation, however, existed in absolute isolation. No visitors, no advertisements, no communication with the broader medical community. Dr. Morrison took note of this and made several attempts to establish professional contact with Blackwood, all of which were politely but firmly rejected. As 1907 wore on, subtle changes began to appear in Blackwood's behavior during his rare visits to eminence. According to a later deposition by Thomas Granger, the shopkeeper's son, the man seemed increasingly haggard, the once well-groomed gentleman now unkempt and visibly worn. His purchases shifted too. Larger quantities of alcohol appeared on his receipts for medical use, he claimed, along with an alarming rise in orders for specialized equipment. Records from the Springfield Medical Supply Company confirmed shipments of surgical instruments, pharmaceutical compounds, and preservation materials addressed to T. Blackwood, physician. No such license, however, was ever recorded under that name in Missouri or any neighboring state. The winter of 1907 to 1908 was one of the harshest the Ozarks had ever endured. Heavy snow cut off most homesteads for weeks, silencing communication and travel. When the thaw finally came in early March, the quiet isolation of Stillwater Hollow drew its first wave of suspicion. Eli Thompson, whose property lay about 3 miles from Blackwood's, reported to the county sheriff that he'd seen smoke rising from the farmhouse chimney all winter, but not a single sign of life. No figures moving outside, no livestock, not even the faintest light after dusk. And despite the snow melting away, no one had come out to clear the road. Sheriff William Donovan, upon hearing the account, decided that a welfare check was warranted. According to his official report, dated March 15, 1908, he set out that morning with his deputy Frederick Mills and Dr. Morrison serving as medical consultant. Their approach to Blackwood property is recalled in remarkable detail in Donovan's later testimony. The access road was nearly impassable, thick with melting snow and fallen branches, showing no evidence of recent travel. As the small party pressed forward, a suffocating silence settled around them. No birdsong, no livestock, not even the familiar barking of dogs that usually greeted strangers in the countryside. The silence felt deliberate, Donovan wrote, as though the land itself was holding its breath. What they found next was documented in Donovan's official report with cold precision. Yet his private letters, discovered after his death in 1923, revealed the torment of a man who never truly recovered from what he saw. The farmhouse appeared still and lifeless. No footprints disturbed the thawing ground. No smoke curled from the chimney. Inside, the front door swung open with little resistance, unlocked, as if waiting for them. The main floor was neat, undisturbed, almost too perfect. On the entry table sat a ledger, a patient registry, listing 8 women's names, their arrival dates, and cryptic medical notations that Donovan, untrained in medicine, could not interpret. The kitchen bore signs of sudden departure. Preserved foods neatly stored, but fresh supplies long gone. Upstairs, they found what appeared to be Blackwood's private quarters, a bedroom furnished far beyond what the modest exterior suggested, a small library of medical texts, and a study filled with extensive documentation. These papers, later central to the investigation, included detailed correspondence with medical research institutions, financial records showing large payments received, and a leather-bound journal containing Blackwood's personal notes, observations on what he chillingly referred to as subjects. Deputy Mills, in a separate report, noted that the house reflected a man of wealth and education, living far beyond what he allowed the townspeople to see. The stark difference between his lavish quarters and the simplicity of the rest of the house was striking, almost jarring. But it was what they found in the cellar that turned a troubling mystery into something far more horrifying. The entrance was hidden beneath a heavy door in the kitchen floor. Below, the cellar had been heavily modified. What once served as a storage space was now divided into small chambers, each roughly 8 feet square. Each room held a narrow bed, a simple wash basin, and, most disturbingly, restraint mechanisms bolted to both the walls and the bed frames. 7 of these rooms showed unmistakable signs of recent use. Discarded clothing, scattered personal items, and scratch marks gouged into the walls. The 8th and final chamber, located at the farthest end of the cellar, was different. It had been transformed into a crude surgical room, equipped with instruments and tools far beyond what any ordinary farmhand or even a rural doctor would ever require. Dr. Morrison's initial assessment, first noted in his field journal and later expanded upon in sworn testimony, was damning. The facility appears designed for confinement and medical processing of individuals. He wrote, specifically women. The surgical area contained equipment suitable for legitimate medical use, yet modified in ways no ethical physician would ever employ. Most disturbing were the numerous preservation containers, the drainage systems, and a series of custom-made instruments clearly designed for tissue extraction and preservation. No lawful medical facility would ever be arranged in such a manner. Sheriff Donovan's report continued with methodical precision, noting that no persons, living or deceased, were found on the premises. Blood evidence, however, was abundant. Heavy concentrations in the surgical area and traces throughout each chamber. No complete human remains were discovered, but fragments of charred human bone were recovered from the ash pit inside the main fireplace. A detailed search of the surrounding hollow revealed multiple areas of disturbed earth, suggesting possible burial sites. The report concluded that Dr. James Morrison was summoned to verify both the medical nature of the instruments and the human origin of the biological material recovered from the scene. The aftermath of the discovery sent shockwaves through the normally quiet Shannon County. Telegrams were dispatched to state authorities, requesting additional investigators and forensic resources. A perimeter was quickly established around the property to preserve what evidence remained. News of the gruesome discovery spread rapidly. By evening, rumors had consumed Eminence and the neighboring communities. 3 days later, the Springfield Republican, the nearest major newspaper, published the first article under the headline, "Abandoned Medical Facility Discovered in Ozarks, Foul Play Suspected." The report was cautious in tone, yet hinted at the deeply unsettling details. The strange surgical rooms, the missing proprietor, the absence of all patients. The investigation that followed was fraught with challenges typical of rural law enforcement at the time. Jurisdictional boundaries between county and state were poorly defined. Communication was slow, and forensic science was still in its infancy. Yet despite these limitations, investigators made a remarkably thorough attempt to uncover the truth of what had transpired at Stillwater Hollow. The patient registry proved their first solid lead. It listed the names of 8 women: Martha Jenkins, Catherine Miller, Louise Hoffman, Sarah Blackstone, Ella Laner Dawson, Beatrice Wilson, Frances Cooper, and Josephine Reynolds. Inquiries were sent to the cities these women supposedly came from: St. Louis, Chicago, and others. Each response came back the same: no records, no trace, no proof these women had ever existed. This led investigators to a chilling realization that the names were likely aliases, either chosen by the women to conceal their identities or assigned to them by Blackwood himself. Newspaper archives soon revealed small, discreet advertisements published in major Midwestern cities. They offered private care for ladies in delicate circumstances and discreet medical attention, directing interested parties to anonymous post office boxes, which investigators later traced back to Thomas Blackwood. Such ads were not uncommon in that era. Legitimate sanitariums often used vague phrasing to protect clients dealing with stigmatized conditions, pregnancies, mental health, or illness. But in Blackwood's case, they appeared carefully designed to lure vulnerable women seeking privacy and medical help, women who would never be heard from again. Nearly a month into the investigation came the first real breakthrough. A railway conductor for the St. Louis and San Francisco line, the Frisco Line, recognized Blackwood's name from the newspaper coverage. In his statement, he recalled seeing the man multiple times over the past 2 years, always in the company of a woman traveling under heavy sedation, allegedly for medical transport. Even more crucially, he remembered seeing Blackwood just days before the farmhouse was discovered, this time traveling alone, heading towards St. Louis. This revelation widened the search, but Blackwood, if that was even his real name, was never located, nor definitively identified. The railway connection, however, became a turning point in understanding the operation. Investigators realized that although 8 women had arrived at Stillwater Hollow by way of Eminence, none were ever seen leaving that way. Instead, Blackwood appeared to have transported them privately to various railway stations along the Frisco Line, typically under the cover of night, to avoid witnesses. Station logs from Salem, Rolla, and other stops recorded occasional late-night departures match his description, always with a woman, described as unwell or sedated. The pattern suggested not only a highly organized system of movement, but raised a horrifying question of where these women were being taken and in what condition. Dr. Morrison's formal examination of the farmhouse confirmed the worst suspicions. In a sworn statement to the county judge, he wrote, "The equipment and structural modifications indicate a clandestine medical operation, though of a kind I have never encountered in legitimate practice. The restraint mechanisms proved the women were held against their will for extended periods. The surgical tools, while of professional quality, show evidence of procedures that would be unacceptable in any reputable institution. Most concerning are the remains found in the fireplace and the extensive blood evidence in the surgical area, suggesting fatal outcomes were not uncommon." The excavation of the hollow confirmed these grim assessments. Though decomposition and scavenging animals had destroyed much of the evidence, Enough remained to establish that at least 5 individuals had been buried in shallow graves. Graves were discovered throughout the property. However, the limited forensic capabilities of the time made it impossible to determine many details about the recovered remains. The most disturbing aspect, noted in the coroner's report but quickly suppressed from newspaper accounts, was the evidence of systematic organ removal prior to burial. This detail sparked immediate controversy among the investigating authorities. The implications were considered far too disturbing for public release, and official statements referred only to medical procedures inconsistent with ethical practice. Privately, however, investigators faced a grim likelihood that the Stillwater Hollow operation had been engaged in the organized harvesting of biological materials, presumably for sale to research institutions or medical schools. This theory was supported by financial records found in Thomas Blackwood's study, which revealed regular payments from unidentified entities, marked only by initials and numerical codes, with sums far exceeding typical medical fees of that era. The financial trail left by Blackwood was both revealing and frustratingly incomplete. Bank records from institutions in St. Louis and Chicago showed large deposits corresponding to the coded payments in his ledger. Yet, these accounts had been emptied in the week preceding the discovery of the abandoned farmhouse. Property records revealed that the Stillwater Hollow land had been purchased outright, not mortgaged, using funds transferred from an account in Philadelphia, an account that had been closed shortly after the transaction. The systematic elimination of financial links suggested careful premeditation and an awareness of investigative methods, a level of sophistication highly unusual for rural crime at the time. Perhaps most revealing were the medical journals and correspondence discovered in Blackwood's study. These materials indicated that he possessed extensive medical knowledge, possibly gained through European training, based on references to specific institutions and advanced techniques. His correspondence with research facilities, conducted under the formal title Dr. T. Blackwood, Research Associate, discussed the provision of fresh specimens and untainted biological materials for scientific studies. While none of these communications explicitly admitted illegal activity, the wording, along with the prices quoted, strongly implied mutual awareness that ethical boundaries were being crossed. Most damning of all was a draft letter, never sent, proposing the expansion of his acquisition network through satellite facilities in other remote regions, suggesting that Blackwood intended to replicate the Stillwater Hollow operation on a broader scale. As the year 1908 progressed, the investigation widened to include potential connections with similar operations elsewhere. Authorities uncovered a network of so-called private sanitariums throughout the Midwest, many of which operated under the guise of charitable institutions offering medical care to women in need. While many of these establishments provided legitimate treatment, others seemed to serve more ambiguous purposes. What made the Stillwater Hollow case distinct was its clear focus, not on care, but on systematic extraction. Dr. Morrison's reluctant conclusion, shared only with law enforcement, stated that the facility had likely been designed specifically for the harvesting of biological materials, a concept so horrifying and beyond comprehension that many officials refused to accept it as plausible. The involvement of legitimate medical institutions became one of the most sensitive aspects of the case. Research facilities and medical schools of the era required a constant supply of anatomical specimens for study and training, creating a demand often met through questionable channels. Typically, these specimens were obtained from unclaimed bodies in hospitals, asylums, or prisons, a practice existing in a gray area of legality but tolerated as necessary for medical advancement. The evidence from Stillwater Hollow, however, suggested something far more predatory: the deliberate targeting of vulnerable individuals for their biological materials, with no regard for survival or consent. A parallel investigation was launched into the potential market for such materials. Medical schools and research institutions across the country often purchase human specimens without questioning their origins. Several respected institutions in St. Louis, Chicago, and cities further east were found to have received research materials from a supplier matching Blackwood's description. Yet, no conclusive links could be established. Where payment records existed, they revealed large transactions, far beyond typical costs for legitimate anatomical specimens. In response, the institutions involved issued uniform denials, expressing shock at the suggestion that they might have been unwitting participants in such an enterprise. Administrators insisted that all specimens had been ethically obtained through legal channels and willing donors. Several universities announced internal investigations, but these reviews concluded abruptly, producing no significant findings. Records of specific acquisitions were either incomplete or had vanished entirely. This institutional reluctance to acknowledge possible complicity effectively brought this line of inquiry to an end, though deep suspicions persisted. Meanwhile, the farmhouse itself became a morbid point of fascination. Despite official efforts to restrict access, curiosity seekers from nearby counties made the difficult journey to see the site for themselves. This grim pilgrimage only ceased when the structure was destroyed by fire in late August 1908. The official report listed the cause of the blaze as unknown, though local rumors suggested that the sheriff himself had ordered the destruction to prevent further contamination of evidence and to erase what many considered a stain upon the community. In the months that followed, the charred ruins were slowly reclaimed by the forest. The land was never reoccupied. With the physical evidence destroyed and the primary suspect vanished, the investigation gradually lost momentum. By the end of 1908, the search for Thomas Blackwood had been reduced to periodic bulletins circulated among major law enforcement agencies. Public interest waned as new scandals and sensations captured newspaper headlines, leaving Stillwater Hollow to fade into a grim and unsettling legend. As the investigation faded, the case began its long transition from an active inquiry into a historical footnote. Sheriff Donovan, however, remained personally committed to finding answers. He maintained regular correspondence with law enforcement officials across the country and preserved a detailed case file that eventually grew to hundreds of pages, filled with notes, newspaper clippings, and potential connections. The women who had vanished into Stillwater Hollow left behind almost no trace. Attempts to match their names with missing persons reports from that period produced inconclusive results. Investigators believe the names listed in Blackwood's registry may have been falsified, or that the women were chosen precisely because their disappearances would draw little attention. What could be determined with reasonable certainty was that these women shared specific characteristics. They were young to middle-aged, unmarried or widowed, and apparently without close family ties. In the social climate of the early 1900s, women suffering from certain medical conditions and lacking family support often found themselves in desperate circumstances, making them easy targets for exploitation. A common theory soon emerged that these women had been lured to Stillwater Hollow under the promise of discreet medical treatment, only to find themselves imprisoned upon arrival. The social dimension of the case sheds light on early 20th century attitudes toward women's health and autonomy. At the time, sanitariums and private arrangements for unfortunate women were common solutions to both social and medical problems. Though often harsh and controlling by modern standards, these institutions typically provided basic care and facilitated recovery, or, in some cases, relocation to new communities where the women's past would be unknown. Blackwood's exploitation of this system relied on two things: the desperation of his victims and society's determination to keep such matters hidden. The secrecy demanded by social convention created the perfect conditions for predation. Contemporary newspaper coverage reveals a cautious dance around these uncomfortable truths. References to the women's situations were cloaked in euphemisms: ladies in delicate condition or women seeking private care, reflecting the era's deep reluctance to address such subjects openly. The same linguistic restraint extended to the criminal aspects of the case. Phrases such as improper medical procedures or exploitation of vulnerable persons served as polite stand-ins to what the evidence actually indicated. Even the most detailed reports avoided any direct mention of the biological harvesting that investigators privately concluded had taken place. This avoidance reflected not only sensitivity to public sensibilities, but also a broader unwillingness to confront such extreme moral depravity. The search for Thomas Blackwood continued across multiple states, but gradually lost momentum as 1908 came to a close. A promising lead surfaced in October, when a man matching his description was reported operating a similar facility near Tulsa, in the Oklahoma Territory. Before authorities could investigate, he vanished once again. The last credible sighting placed him boarding a steamship in New Orleans bound for South America in December 1908. His true identity remains unknown to this day, though later research uncovered potential connections to a Dr. Battius Baxter, a physician whose medical license had been revoked in Massachusetts in 1899 for performing experimental procedures of an unethical nature. This possible link to Baxter opened a troubling window into the state of medical ethics during that era. The late 19th and early 20th centuries were periods of rapid medical advancement, when the boundary between legitimate research and unethical experimentation was often blurred. Medical licensing varied widely between states, allowing practitioners whose credentials had been questioned or revoked in one jurisdiction to simply relocate and continue their work elsewhere. Records of Baxter's license revocation, preserved by the Massachusetts Medical Board, describe unconventional surgical exploration and tissue collection without therapeutic purpose. Phrasing that, while carefully worded, strongly suggests activities not unlike those uncovered at Stillwater Hollow. Throughout the following decade, scattered reports continue to emerge of similar operations discovered in remote parts of the United States. A facility in northern Michigan was closed in 1910 after local authorities became suspicious of unusual supply deliveries. Another private sanitarium in rural Pennsylvania was hastily abandoned in 1912, just ahead of an official investigation, leaving behind evidence of restraints and surgical equipment. None of these incidents were ever definitively linked to Blackwood or Baxter, but the striking similarities in methods and victims suggested either a direct connection or, more disturbingly, the existence of a broader pattern of exploitation occurring independently across the country. The recurring elements were always the same: vulnerable women, isolated rural locations, and tenuous connections to legitimate medical institutions that remained officially unacknowledged. The most comprehensive study of the Stillwater Hollow case emerged decades later, in 1964, when historian Elena Marsh of the University of Missouri undertook a doctoral dissertation examining rural crime in the early 20th century. Her research uncovered previously unknown connections between the Ozark case and similar operations exposed in Pennsylvania in 1904, Illinois in 1907, and Colorado in 1909. In each of these instances, the operators disappeared shortly before discovery, leading Marsh to conclude that a coordinated network might have existed. Even more disturbing was her discovery of financial documents revealing that biological specimens supplied by these operations had been purchased by several prestigious medical institutions, organizations that appear to have asked few questions about their origins. Marsh's investigation extended into the records of these institutional buyers, but she met with significant resistance. University archives that had previously been open to researchers were suddenly closed. Administrators declined interview requests, and in one case, research materials that Marsh had already obtained were mysteriously confiscated without explanation. The materials she had been examining were removed from circulation entirely. Her correspondence from this period, preserved by her family, reveals growing frustration and a deepening sense of deliberate obstruction. There appears to be a coordinated effort to maintain institutional distance from these historical events, she wrote to a colleague in early 1969. Whether this reflected concern for contemporary reputation or an attempt to conceal past complicity remains unclear, but the pattern is unmistakable. Professor Marsh's research was never published beyond her dissertation. According to her colleagues, she abandoned the project after receiving a series of anonymous threats. The dissertation itself was archived and largely forgotten until 1968, when a fire in the university archives damaged many historical documents. The surviving pages were microfilmed, but later misplaced during a departmental reorganization. What remains today are her notes and interview transcripts, preserved by her family after her death in 1969, officially ruled a suicide. Though those familiar with her work suspected otherwise, the circumstances surrounding her death added a deeply troubling coda to the Stillwater Hollow narrative. She was found in her university office, apparently having died from a self-administered overdose of barbiturates. Her death was quickly recorded as a suicide attributed to academic pressure and emotional instability. Colleagues later noted that her research materials had been heavily disturbed, key documents missing and files clearly searched. Even more concerning was the reported content of her final research journal, which family members claimed contained references to surveillance and repeated warnings she had received in the weeks leading up to her death. This journal was never returned to the family, and university officials denied any knowledge of its existence. Whether these events point to genuine interference or to paranoia resulting from immersion in such dark historical material remains impossible to determine with certainty. The local impact of the Stillwater Hollow discovery, however, was both profound and lasting. Shannon County endured what one newspaper described as a crisis of confidence in local authorities who had failed to detect or investigate the operation sooner. The nearby town of Eminence, unfairly tainted by association with the case, suffered economic decline as investors and settlers began to avoid the area. Local accounts describe a period of deep suspicion, with residents questioning how well they truly knew their neighbors. Several families connected in any way to the Blackwood property, including those who had sold supplies or transported materials, chose to relocate rather than face ongoing scrutiny. For those directly involved in the discovery and investigation, the psychological toll was immense and enduring. Deputy Frederick Mills requested reassignment within months and eventually moved to Kansas City, where he reportedly refused to speak of the events. Even the family, Dr. Morrison, became increasingly devoted to establishing legitimate medical services in the region, seemingly in direct response to the perversion of medicine he had witnessed. In his private correspondence, he expressed ongoing distress at the realization that procedures conducted in the name of medical science could so deeply violate the principle of do no harm. Perhaps the most telling legacy of the case was its gradual fade into obscurity. By 1910, national newspapers had turned their attention to other sensational stories. Local publications reduced their coverage to brief retrospectives, framing it as a mysterious tragedy rather than an unresolved investigation. Official records were filed away, many eventually lost to time and circumstance. The case became something whispered about among locals, a cautionary tale about trusting outsiders, rarely discussed in full. This collective silence served as a kind of quarantine, an effort by the community to contain an unspeakable evil by refusing to acknowledge it completely. Sheriff William Donovan, the first official to discover the abandoned farmhouse, never recovered from the experience. His journal entries from the following years reveal a man tormented by what he had witnessed, and perhaps even more by what he had failed to prevent. "I passed that property no less than a dozen times during those years," he wrote in 1912. "Each time I noticed its isolation, the lack of normal farm activity. Yet I did nothing. The women who suffered there deserved better vigilance than I provided." Donovan resigned his post in 1913 and lived in seclusion until his death a decade later. The broader implications of the case extend far beyond its immediate horrors, touching on enduring questions of medical ethics, the exploitation of vulnerable populations, and the dark potential of isolation. The early 20th century was a transitional era in medicine, moving toward standardized training and ethical oversight, yet still riddled with gray areas that allowed exploitation to thrive. The economic value placed on human biological materials created powerful incentives. Without strict regulation, such motivations could easily give rise to operations like the one uncovered at Stillwater Hollow. That these practices were not isolated, but appeared connected to legitimate medical institutions, raises disturbing questions about historical complicity that have never been fully resolved. The isolation that defined the Ozarks at the time was both geographical and social. Remote communities operated with minimal external oversight, allowing questionable behaviors to persist so long as they did not directly affect neighbors. Meanwhile, the social isolation of women, especially those deemed in need of discreet treatment, created a population uniquely vulnerable to exploitation. Their disappearances, often when unquestioned or worse, were considered a form of social cleansing, the quiet removal of perceived source of discomfort. This intersection of geographical and social isolation created the perfect conditions for the events that would come to define Stillwater Hollow. Isolation created the perfect conditions for predatory operations like Stillwater Hollow to develop and endure. Dr. James Morrison, whose medical expertise was crucial to understanding the nature of the operation, became a strong advocate for stricter regulation of rural health care. His repeated petitions to the state medical board led to new requirements for registration and inspection of all facilities claiming to provide medical services. In his later years, Morrison trained local midwives and founded a small, legitimate medical clinic in Eminence, perhaps seeking some form of personal atonement for the horrors he had helped expose. His grandson, also a physician, later recalled, "Grandfather never spoke directly of what he found at the farmhouse, but its shadow followed him all his life. He checked and rechecked his own work with a kind of desperate thoroughness, as though perpetually afraid of missing some critical detail." The aftermath of the Stillwater Hollow case coincided with broader progressive reforms in American society. The early 20th century saw increasing regulation of medical practice, greater social support for vulnerable populations, and the rise of early social safety nets. While these reforms cannot be directly attributed to the Ozark case, which remained relatively obscure in national awareness, they address many of the same conditions that had allowed such exploitation to occur. Legitimate medical facilities came under stricter oversight, licensing standards were tightened, and the gradual, though incomplete, reduction of stigma surrounding certain medical conditions began to reduce women's vulnerability in such situations. The land where the farmhouse once stood was eventually absorbed into what became the Mark Twain National Forest in the 1930s. No marker identifies the site's grim history, though locals claim that certain parts of the forest remain eerily silent, devoid of the usual wildlife sounds that fill the Ozark woodlands. Rangers assigned to the area report no unusual incidents, yet many quietly admit to an unspoken tradition of avoiding specific coordinates during solo patrols. The exact location of the original Stillwater Hollow property has been deliberately obscured in official records, ostensibly to preserve the integrity of a potential crime scene, but more likely to discourage macabre tourism. Over time, the story of Stillwater Hollow has resurfaced occasionally in regional folklore, usually stripped of its most disturbing truths and reshaped into more conventional tales of mystery or haunting. These sanitized versions rarely mention the women who vanished there or the true purpose of the operation, instead focusing on the abandoned farmhouse as a place of vague unease. This transformation, from specific historical atrocity to generalized ghost story, represents another form of collective forgetting. It replaces an uncomfortable truth with a fiction that is easier to bear. For those familiar with the real history, these legends serve as a painful reminder of how quickly human memory distorts or deliberately erases unpleasant realities. In 1958, 50 years after the discovery, the Shannon County Historical Society considered creating an exhibit about the case as part of a broader local history display. The proposal met with strong community resistance, with many older residents insisting that some stories were better left untold. The compromise reached was modest: a single photograph of the surrounding area accompanied by a plaque reading only, cite of significant local historical interest, 1902 to 1908. No further explanation was offered. Visitors unaware of the case would have no reason to suspect the dark past that lingered there. This obscure memorial stands as perhaps the most fitting tribute to a story defined by silence, secrecy, and the human capacity for willful forgetting. Occasional academic interest in the case has surfaced over the decades, often from scholars studying the history of medical ethics or rural crime. Yet these investigations have been continually hampered by fragmented records, lost evidence, and the deaths of all direct witnesses. What remains is a historical outline filled with disturbing implications, but few definitive conclusions. A case that raises far more questions than it answers about humanity's capacity for evil in ordinary circumstances. The most thorough modern study came from medical historian Dr. Carolyn Waber, whose 2002 article in the Journal of Medical Ethics linked the Stillwater Hollow case to broader patterns of exploitation in early medical research. She noted that the most disturbing aspect of such events is not their rarity, but rather how they fit within a recognizable continuum of ethical compromise. The most enduring mystery of Stillwater Hollow is not what happened there. The surviving evidence, though incomplete, paints a clear enough picture of exploitation, medical atrocity, and murder. The real question lies in how such operations could exist at all, hidden yet connected, serving the needs of legitimate institutions while functioning entirely outside the bounds of humanity. Thomas Blackwood, or whatever his true name may have been, represents a particular kind of evil, one that wears a mask of respectability and speaks a language of progress while committing unspeakable acts in the shadows. His story resonates not because it is exceptional, but because it reveals the darkest potential within so-called civilized society. The women who disappeared into the farmhouse left behind no diaries, no letters, and no final testimonies. Their experiences can only be reconstructed from clinical reports and physical evidence, an erasure that compounds the original violence done to them. In the decades since, researchers have tried to give names and histories to these women, to transform them from anonymous victims into individuals with lives that existed before their tragic ends. These efforts, though well-intentioned, remain largely speculative. The true stories of Martha Jenkins, Catherine Miller, and the others died with them in that house. The isolation of the Ozarks created the perfect conditions for predatory operations like Stillwater Hollow to arise and endure. Dr. James Morrison, whose medical expertise was crucial in understanding the nature of what had taken place, became a passionate advocate for tighter regulation of rural health care. His repeated petitions to the state medical board led to new laws requiring the registration and inspection of all facilities claiming to offer medical services. In his later years, Morrison trained local midwives and established a small, legitimate medical clinic in Eminence, perhaps seeking some measure of atonement for the horrors he had helped expose. His grandson, also a physician, once recalled, "Grandfather never spoke directly of what he found at Farmhouse, but its shadow followed him throughout his life. He checked and rechecked his own work with a kind of desperate thoroughness, as though forever afraid of missing some crucial detail." The aftermath of the Stillwater Hollow case coincided with broader progressive reforms sweeping through American society. The early 20th century saw increasing regulation of medical practice, greater social support for vulnerable populations, and a growing recognition of the need for safety nets. While these changes cannot be directly attributed to the Ozark case, which remained largely obscure in the national consciousness, they address many of the same conditions that had enabled such exploitation to occur. Legitimate medical institutions came under stricter oversight, licensing requirements tightened, and slowly, though far from completely, stigma surrounding certain medical conditions began to fade. This shift helped reduce the vulnerability of women who might otherwise have fallen prey to exploitation. The land where the farmhouse once stood was later absorbed into what became the Mark Twain National Forest in the 1930s. No marker acknowledges its grim history, yet locals insist that certain areas of the forest remain strangely silent, devoid of the usual sounds of Ozark wildlife. Rangers assigned to that region report no unusual activity, though many quietly admit to avoiding certain coordinates during solo patrols. The exact location of the Stillwater Hollow property has been deliberately obscured in official records, officially to prevent disturbance of a possible crime scene, but more likely to discourage macabre tourism. Over the years, the story of Stillwater Hollow has resurfaced in regional folklore, often stripped of its most disturbing truths and reshaped into conventional tales of mystery or haunting. These softened retellings rarely mention the women who vanished there or the true purpose of the operation. Instead, they focus on the abandoned farmhouse as a generic site of unease. This transformation, from a specific historical atrocity to a vague supernatural legend, represents another form of collective forgetting. It replaces the uncomfortable weight of real history with a more palatable fiction. For those who know the truth, these legends are an unsettling reminder of how easily human memory distorts or discards what it cannot face. In 1958, 50 years after the Farmhouse's discovery, the Shannon County Historical Society considered creating an exhibit about the case. The idea met fierce community resistance, many older residents insisting that some stories were best left untold. A compromise was reached. A single photograph of the area, accompanied by a small plaque reading "Only," site of significant local historical interest, 1902 to 1908. No further context was given. Visitors unaware of the case would never guess what had occurred there. That quiet, cryptic memorial may be the most fitting testament to a case defined by silence, secrecy, and humanity's talent for willful forgetting. Occasional academic interest has resurfaced over the decades, mostly from scholars studying medical ethics or rural crime. But these investigations have been hindered by missing records, lost evidence, and the deaths of all first-hand witnesses. What remains is a fragmented historical outline, haunting in its implications, yet offering few definitive answers. The Stillwater Hollow case raises more questions than it resolves. Questions about the capacity for evil within ordinary circumstances. The most comprehensive modern examination came from medical historian Dr. Carolyn Waber, whose 2002 article in the Journal of Medical Ethics links Stillwater Hollow to broader patterns of exploitation in early medical research. She noted that the most disturbing aspect of such cases is not their rarity, but how they fit into a recognizable continuum of ethical compromise. The most enduring mystery of Stillwater Hollow is not what happened there. The evidence, though incomplete, paints a grimly clear picture of exploitation, medical atrocity, and murder. Rather, the true enigma lies in how such operations could exist at all. Hidden yet connected, serving the demands of legitimate institutions while operating entirely outside the bounds of humanity. Thomas Blackwood, or whatever his real name was, embodied a particular kind of evil, one that wears a mask of respectability and speaks a language of progress while committing unspeakable acts in the shadows. His story resonates not because it is unique, but because it reveals the darkest potential within civilized society. The women who vanished into that farmhouse left behind no diaries, no letters home, no final words. Their experiences can only be pieced together from clinical notes and physical evidence, an erasure that compounds the original violence inflicted upon them. In the years since, researchers have tried to give these women back their names and stories, to remember them not as statistics, but as individuals whose lives were stolen. Though well-intentioned, these efforts remain largely speculative. The real stories of Martha Jenkins, Catherine Miller, and the others, whatever their true names may have been, died with them in the cellar rooms of Stillwater Hollow. The individuals directly involved in the Stillwater Hollow case are long deceased. From time to time, cold case initiatives revisit the file, yet no significant new evidence has surfaced in decades. What remains are fragments, incomplete records, conflicting testimonies, and physical evidence long compromised by time and poor preservation. From these remnants, we can reconstruct the outline of what occurred, but the full darkness at its center will never be completely illuminated. The legacy of Thomas Blackwood may reach far beyond that single operation in the Ozarks. Historians examining similar cases have found recurring patterns suggesting that individuals using his methods operate across rural America during the early 20th century, establishing hidden facilities, then abandoning them before discovery. Whether these represent a coordinated network or a series of opportunists exploiting the same vulnerabilities remains uncertain. What is clear, however, is that the conditions that allowed Stillwater Hollow to exist, isolation, lack of oversight, vulnerable populations, and a steady demand for illicit medical materials, were not unique to the Ozarks, nor to that moment in time. In the years since, the forest has reclaimed the land where the farmhouse once stood. Nature's quiet indifference to human tragedy has nearly erased every trace that anything ever happened there. Seasons pass. Trees grow and fall. Wildlife returns to ground once steeped in horror. This natural reclamation serves as both erasure and memorial. The earth itself holds no memory, yet the space remains transformed by what occurred. Those who know the history and wander those woods today report nothing supernatural, no spectral presences or unexplained phenomena. The true haunting exists only in human memory and record, in the awareness of what people can do to one another in hidden places, behind closed doors, when no one is watching or willing to intervene. The final fate of Thomas Blackwood remains unknown. If reports of his flight to South America are true, he may have continued his work elsewhere, perhaps under another identity. The limited communication and record-keeping of the early 20th century would have made such movements nearly impossible to trace. Some researchers have noted possible links to similar operations in Argentina and Brazil during the 1910s and 1920s. Yet conclusive evidence remains elusive. Like many perpetrators of his era, Blackwood may have simply disappeared into history, his true identity and ultimate fate forever obscured. What is certain is the devastating impact Stillwater Hollow had on those who confronted its horrors. Sheriff Donovan's eventual breakdown and withdrawal from public life, Dr. Morrison's lifelong search for atonement to legitimate medical service, and Eleanor Marsh's increasingly paranoid research notes leading up to her suspected suicide, all stand as testimonies to the unbearable weight of knowing what they had uncovered. Even decades later, residents of Shannon County remain reluctant to speak of the case, as though mentioning it might somehow draw the darkness back upon their community. Some forms of horror leave impressions that echo far beyond their time, altering not only those directly involved, but generations that follow. The women who lost their lives at Stillwater Hollow deserve to be remembered not only as victims of atrocity, but as human beings trapped by circumstances beyond their control. In early 20th century America, certain medical conditions carried severe social stigma, often resulting in complete ostracism from family and community. Desperate and isolated, these women sought help, only to encounter a system designed to exploit their vulnerability. Their tragedy lies not solely in their deaths, but in a society that left them with so few choices that even Blackwood's false promises seemed like salvation. In this sense, the true horror of Stillwater Hollow extends beyond the farmhouse walls. It encompasses the broader social failures that allowed such an operation to exist at all. As time passes and the last living connections fade, the story transitions from history into legend. Like many dark chapters in America's past, it risks being either forgotten entirely or twisted into sensational fiction, stripped of its human truth and moral complexity. The responsible approach lies somewhere between those extremes, acknowledging what happened without exploitation, preserving the record without obsession, and recognizing the lessons without reducing human suffering to mere cautionary tales. The women who disappeared deserve no less, to be remembered honestly, their experiences neither sanitized nor sensationalized, but held in the somber light of historical truth. Today, the Ozarks bear little resemblance to the isolated wilderness where Thomas Blackwood once established his operation. Roads now cut through what were once impassable hills. Communication is instantaneous, and the scrutiny of modern society reaches even its most remote corners. Yet the fundamental dynamics that enabled Stillwater Hollow remain disturbingly familiar. The exploitation of the vulnerable, the demand for illicit services, and the tendency of communities to look away from uncomfortable truths. Different circumstances, different victims, different methods, but the same human capacity for predation and willful blindness. Perhaps this is why the case continues to unsettle those who learn of it. Not because it depicts something alien, but because it reflects patterns that still exist within our world. In the end, what happened at the farmhouse in Stillwater Hollow was not supernatural nor inexplicable. It required no monsters beyond the human capacity for cruelty and indifference. The true horror lies in its plausibility, in its place within a recognizable historical context, and in its mirror of vulnerabilities that persist even now. We retell these histories not to indulge in macabre, but to remain vigilant against the darkness that can grow in forgotten corners, behind closed doors, when society turns away from its most vulnerable members. The empty rooms of the farmhouse, the silent hollow where it once stood, and the women who vanished within its walls remind us of one enduring truth. Evil requires neither grand design nor demonic genius, only opportunity, isolation, and the quiet complicity of those who choose not to see.